How's everyone doing this morning? Everybody having a good conference?
That's good.
Awesome. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Jason Thwaney of Oak, Canna, and Wellness. We also have Gabe Mendoza of Forefront Ventures. And we have Harrison Bard of Custom Cones, and then Brutnovi Pharmacan.
So my name is Jason Thwaney. I'm with Oak Canna Brands. We provide an array of pre-rolls. We have non-infused pre-rolls that come in a pack of 10, which are called J's. We have a infused pre-roll, which is called Toker's Choice. And we also make we have a brand called Dutch Girl Donuts, which is a hash rosin infused donut roll. And those are the 3 rolls we specialize in at Oak Canna.
Jason, I cannot wait to try that donut roll you gave me yesterday, so very excited about that. Hi everybody, Gabe Mendoza, Forefront Ventures. I run revenue for them. In terms of what pre-rolls we actually have been in the industry now for about 10 years. And so we have created and seen lots of successful and unsuccessful as well pre-rolls. But for us, we have a terpene-infused pre-roll called a terp stick. So that's terpenes, that's distillate, that's flower. We also have a homage to it's a tobacco-free blunt called 1988, which was the first time that blunt was ever used in hip-hop culture. We also run your standard pre-rolls, multi-packs infused with live resin, infused with distillate. And so we run the gambit of the different pre-roll options that you'll see in the markets.
Harrison Bard from Custom Cones USA. We're the leading pre-roll supplier in terms of all things pre-roll. We have the widest variety of all the paper products, rolling papers, blunt wraps, different type of filter tips. We also specialize in all the different machines. So we don't just sell you the pre-rolls and the packaging. We have a really thorough understanding of the entire manufacturing process, from grinding to sifting, how to get started with tabletop machines and then scale up with automation. So we're really a key partner with all the pre-roll manufacturing businesses all throughout the US, Canada, and we do work with companies worldwide.
Brutnovi Pharmacan. We sell the gamut of pre-rolls as well, including infused and uninfused blunts, infused and uninfused pre-rolls, and then pre-rolls of all different sizes. And depending on the size of the market, we incorporate different various degrees of automation as well, which I think we'll talk about later.
Yeah, so we're going to dive into some of the data behind pre-rolls and how they're selling in multiple markets throughout the country. So Harrison is going to tell us a little bit about some of that data that we're going to put on the screen.
But yeah, we've partnered with Headset to do the most comprehensive deep dive into the pre-roll sector. We just released a white paper covering the whole US market a few months ago. And then just last month, we released a white paper covering the Canadian market. First slide's going to show you the year-over-year trend of sales in both the US and Canada, so just a top-line figure. The Canadian market was up 7% year-over-year. In the US, sales were down 1% year-over-year. This is a total dollar figure, so in terms of actual units, consumption's up. There's huge price compression across all categories. The average price compression is about 20%, given the different categories. Pre-rolls actually have the least amount of price compression. A lot of that's driven by the infused pre-roll growth. So in terms of total dollars, sales are down, but total units is up. And a lot of states are also struggling with like legacy or illicit sales. So total consumption is up a lot year over year. Then if you could see the next slide, we would dig into the different states or provinces that's driving this growth. In Canada, Ontario is pretty flat, which is the biggest province, but the other 3 main provinces had pretty strong growth. In the US, Michigan's the fastest growing market, growing 32% year over year. And then we've seen declines in the older markets like Washington, Oregon, California, and Colorado. Those typically had 10% declines in total dollar sales. But again, if you consider the price compression, total units is going to be up. And then the newer states like Florida, Illinois, Massachusetts, and of course Michigan are going to be the faster growing states. And then we see this trend play out where mature markets have a peak. COVID sort of pushed an artificial peak of demand where consumers were home getting free money, and a lot of people did spend that at dispensaries. So there's a little bit of normalization post-COVID as well. And then the next slide, if you're able to see it, and I could share all this, we have all of the white papers up at customconesusa.com. Would be what segments or categories are driving this growth. So pre-rolls was the fastest growing segment both in the US and in Canada. In the US, pre-rolls were growing 12% year over year. In Canada, pre-rolls grew 38% year over year. The Canadian growth was largely driven by infused pre-rolls, where they were previously not allowed. Health Canada is very strict, and a lot of LPs were too scared or didn't know how to get those approved under Health Canada guidelines. So infused pre-rolls actually grew over like 1,400% in Canada, as there's been a flooding into the market. And then the health and wellness categories are the ones that you'd see with the biggest declines, like capsules, sublinguals, and topicals. Those are typically shrinking 20 or more % year over year. Flower sales are down as customers are shifting their buying into pre-rolls and vapes. Yeah, the other fastest growing categories would be edibles, vapes, and then the other subsegment besides infused pre-rolls that's really pushing the demand is the all-in-one disposable vapes. So there's a trend that you could see in terms of convenience. So customers are shifting from flower into pre-rolls for convenience sake, and then even the all-in-one disposable vapes, as those are more convenient.
And we're finding that a lot of the best-selling pre-rolls are infused with terpenes. So what are the pros and cons with using terpenes in your pre-rolls?
Well, the pros for using terpenes, I'll give you the reason why terpene-infused pre-rolls are taken off so well is the market that they're taken from is the vape cart segment. So a lot of those vape carts have a very sweet taste, a savory taste, and you're tasting something like tasty. And once we figured out that you can use that on the flower side, you now can take almost any type of flower there is. It doesn't matter what the quality is. I'm not saying you should do that, but all you do is you just spray it with the terps, and now you got a flower that's gonna taste the same all the time. That's a very similar methodology that the tobacco companies use. So like if you're smoking a pack of Newports, let's say, you're not smoking the tobacco, you're smoking the chemical they spray on it. The tobacco is just a filler. And today, the terpene-infused pre-rolls, the tobacco, or the cannabis that's in the pre-rolls, the flower part of it is really just like a filler. That's not even what's really getting you high. It's, if it's infused with distillate, if it's infused with hash, it could be just infused with anything. If it's infused with hash, it's probably better. But it could be infused with keef. So there's all these different forms of infusion. And what happens is the consumer's getting a much stronger form of cannabis, which competes with a distillate cart. And that's where you see them growing the fastest at. And in the next year or two, maybe a little less, pre-rolls will be the #1 selling SKU in Michigan, at least. Right. It's very close.
Right. And Gabe, what about you? Like pros and cons of dealing with terpenes in your pre-rolls?
Yeah, so we introduced this 8 years ago in Washington, and the main thought process behind this, right, is you offer a consistent experience. If you can dial in terpenes and you can offer them like we're saying here, it offers you a consistent experience time over time. The tough thing with this that we found that gave us a unique selling proposition was when you mix terpenes, distillate, keef, flower together, the homogenization process you have to really get right, or you're going to see these things they're going to canoe, right? And so one of the things that you really have to look for when you're trying to combine this is, okay, well, how are you going to combine this in a way where it's going to be homogenized and you're going to get a consistent experience, because that's incredibly important when you're building a pre-roll brand, is the consistency of that experience. And we also found that this was for individuals who were not like quote unquote purists, like the individuals who always roll their own flower, right? Who want to be able to taste the flower. This is for those individuals who wanted a high potency, flavorful experience that they could get time and time again.
When you speak to consumers and bud tenders, the two things that they're really looking for is potency and flavor. That's what the core cannabis consumer really values in their product. So terpenes are really getting added via the concentrate. You're not typically spraying terpenes directly onto the flower. They're really volatile and would evaporate pretty quickly, so the oil helps hold on to that. So then there's botanical terpenes and actual natural cannabis-derived terpenes. And the cannabis-derived terpenes are really expensive if it's just extracted and sold in pure terpene format. So they're typically being added with the actual concentrate, live resin being one of the more popular ones. Distillate has little to no terpenes, so with that type of concentrate, you are adding those botanical terpenes, which are natural, but they're derived from plant materials. There's certain type of consumers who like the fruity flavors. They're going to enjoy the botanical terpenes. And then the more purists, they're not going to like that at all. What we see is cannabis companies and pre-roll companies that are the most successful have a lot of product variety. So they're going to have singles, they're going to have multi-packs, they're going to have infused pre-rolls and premium products with premium filter tips. And I think it's really smart to offer both botanical infused pre-rolls where they do have the fruity flavors. Jeter is a good example of that. They're super popular and almost all of their products have those botanical fruity flavors in them. But the core consumer is not going to like that. So by offering something with hash rosin or live resin, that's going to give you the actual cannabis derived terpenes in there, more of a natural plant flavor. But it is smart to do both. As consumers, there's different segments that prefer one over the other.
And Brett?
The majority of the pre-rolls we sell, we don't sell popcorn buds. We could put all our popcorn buds into our pre-rolls. So the majority of pre-rolls we sell are uninfused, just straight, cannabis pre-rolls. We've started to make botanical infused distillate pre-rolls as well, which are selling really well. It's a higher end category for us. We use glass tips. It's a new brand that we launched, but by far and away, we are servicing sort of the convenience category with respect to pre-rolls, which is, good value, high quality, and just ease of use and convenience of transportation, et cetera. So.
Right. What about packaging? How important is packaging when it comes to pre-rolls?
It depends. Look, if some people just want a very inexpensive pre-roll, they don't care about packaging, we offer that. Some people want a higher end experience, and we offer that as well with higher end packaging, but that's a more expensive product. So everybody that consumes flower in general, in my opinion, at some point purchases pre-rolls, either infused or uninfused or blunts or whatever. And so we try to identify that demographic of customer and have that offering for them, irrespective of their price points.
Harrison, I know you have some opinions about packaging here.
Yeah, so we offer all the different types of pre-roll packaging. Pop tops are going to be the most popular just because cannabis manufacturers are really tight on their margins. So that's going to be the cheapest, most compliant option. But if you're selling an elevated type of pre-roll or you're trying to convey a premium brand, the glass tube is really popular and also a better moisture and oxygen barrier, so it's going to keep that pre-roll fresher. And then we're seeing huge growth in multi-packs. Back in 2018, multi-packs only made up about 27% of all pre-roll sales. And now so far in 2023, it's making up 47% of all pre-roll sales. So multi-packs are huge, and those could either be a paper box, a tin, or a plastic box, or a jar of some sort. So those are getting really popular. And people are putting humidity packs inside of their packaging to make sure it stays fresh. And it's really important to connect with the bud tender. They're gonna help sell your product to the consumer. And they're really, they pay attention to the packaging. A lot of people buy with their eyes. So if it looks premium, it's gonna help convey that premium messaging and get that message across all the way to your customer.
I was gonna piggyback on that. Whatever you're doing, make sure it's consistent, right? Make sure if you are offering a premium product, ensure that you understand the different variables in supply chain that will allow you to continue to maintain that premium product packaging, and make sure that you are educating your bud tenders and the purchasing manager that this is our unique selling proposition because of this product packaging, if it's packaging, right? So consistency is important. To Brett's point, it depends on where you are, where you're going to meet your customer, right? If you are if you're putting a price point that is high, you better not be putting pop top tubes in there and expect you guys to be selling volume. So that's basically it.
Packaging for us was very important. When we introduced Jay's and Toker's Choice, one of our things was when we were building the brand, we seen other competitors, other companies, they're not competitors, like Lowell, they were like the first recognizable pre-roll company. They came in a special pack. And my partner, he was very smart. He said, why don't we just create a cigarette pack? Didn't you always want to smoke that when you were younger? Like Wish cigarettes, weed came in cigarette packs. So we created Michigan, or maybe the country's first cigarette pack, November of 21. And That right there, when we introduced it to the market, the pack alone, people bought it for because they thought it was so cool because they thought about that when they were a kid. Hey, I wish I could smoke, weed out of a cigarette pack. The convenience. When we introduced that to the market, that alone just sold it by itself. A secondary thing for packaging is very important is how do you keep your product fresh? So a lot of people who make pre-rolls, competitors right now, they put their pre-rolls, infused pre-rolls in a see-through glass jar. Well, that's not UV rated, UV coated. If that thing sits in a shelf for 30, 60 days, it's gonna turn brown or yellow. And packaging is very important. Like companies like that who don't do the research, they don't do their consumer any justice. Humidity, if you in our J packs, we put Bavita 58% in every pack. We just want the consumer to have the best experience possible when they smoke our product. We want them to have a fresh joint that won't canoe, and those are all reasons why it's very important to focus on the right style packaging and what's in there.
Jason, what kind of pricing are you seeing on pre-rolls in Michigan?
Well, pre-rolls wholesale or retail?
Wholesale.
Wholesale, I've seen prices as low as $1, but they can't even identify if that's even cannabis in there. They don't care. I've literally gotten that in there. They don't know what it is. They just know test at 20%. So they don't care. And the average, they're coming in at around $2.50 for the bulk guys, the guys who sell in bulk. It's $2 to $4. One to $4, but the $2 ones are probably the highest sellers in the state.
Right. Gabe, what does it take to be a winning pre-roll, to have a winning pre-roll?
What a question. So I think that we covered a lot of this in this call, and so look, 10 years into the industry, we have seen a lot of successes, and when I look and try to aggregate what separates those who are successful from those who aren't successful, I can probably distill it down into about 4 different bullet points. The first is you have to be creative, right? I mean, you have to enter into a market with a unique selling proposition that is yours and yours alone. Like I was talking about earlier, when we entered into the Washington market, we weren't the first terpene-infused pre-roll in the market, but we were the first terpene-infused pre-roll that offered consistency, that was homogenized enough so it wouldn't canoe, and it was especially hard to do that back then. And so the first one is creativity, right? How are you going to be uniquely positioning yourself where, especially in a category like pre-rolls, which is so established, how are you going to differentiate yourself? The next one would be, how are you going to stay competitive from a consumer standpoint? How are you going to focus on the consumer, right? You have to know who your consumer is and when they are your consumer. And what I mean by that is the person who's buying a pre-roll from your dispensary is not your initial consumer. Your initial customer is the individual who's purchasing your product. Your initial customer is the bud tender. You have to give them samples. You have to give them product education, or else they're never going to be able to feel comfortable selling your product. The next one is consistency. We talked about that too, right? You have to be able to meet the needs and the promise, your brand promise, every single time, right? So you have to be able to consistently meet that from a physical product standpoint, but also from an availability standpoint. We were talking to Jason in the back room, and the reality is, if you're diving too wide where you don't have enough product to meet the needs of your customer base, you're not offering that consistent product. So you have to ask yourself, with my limited availability to produce X amount of pre-rolls, how do I go about doing that? Do I spread it out to everybody so that everyone gets a little taste and then there's nothing left? Do I go deep? These are really important questions you have to ask yourself. And then the final one, I think, is understanding your cost structure, right? I mean, do you know how much it costs to take one unit, create that unit, and deliver it to the dispensary? This is a price game, right? Whether you make a high quality product or low value product, you have to understand the pricing associated with that, because if you don't know that and you're toggling your price to meet the needs of the market, you've already lost. So I think, again, in summary, if you can offer a consistent product if you're customer focused, if you understand your costs, and if you're creative, you'll set a very, very good foundation for a successful brand.
Yeah, so to be a winning brand, you have to have a good product, of course. And so what good means that, as I said before, the core consumer is looking for something that's potent and also tastes good. It, of course, has to burn well. That's a bare minimum. If you sell a pre-roll that is too tight and doesn't have a good draw or clogs up, you're going to lose that customer. They're probably never going to buy that pre-roll again. So those type of issues are caused by having too finely ground material and having things too densely packed. So that all starts on the production side, and it all starts with the grind. And then what's good for a consumer is different. As I said, there's different types of consumers. So there's that value consumer. So they're just looking for what's good enough in terms of the quality, in terms of the potency and the flavor. And then there's consumers that are looking for a really premium experience, so they're going to want something with a specialty tip like glass, ceramic, or wood. They're going to want that infused with a higher quality concentrate, probably not distillate. Some customers like flavors. So the winning pre-roll brands that we see have a lot of product diversity, and a lot of the biggest companies we work with have multiple brands. They'll have a value brand, they'll have a more premium brand, and then they may even have one in the middle of like an affordable luxury type of everyday type of pre-roll brand. So you want to have product variety both on the SKUs and potentially have different brands. You're going to want to have those infused pre-rolls. If you're not doing infused pre-rolls, you're missing the boat. You definitely need to start adding those to your product line right now. Multi-packs is super important. The 2-packs are growing a lot, but the biggest multi-pack forms are 5-packs and 10-packs. Those are seeing the most growth. And there's people even selling 28 packs of 1 gram pre-rolls, so you're keeping that customer hooked for probably the entire month, and then they're gonna keep coming back to your brand over and over again. And then the biggest thing really is connecting with the bud tenders. They're your gatekeeper. Most consumers love product variety, so they're gonna go into the store and they're gonna ask what's new, what's different. There's a big brand in Washington that thought that they could just do these same strains over and over again, and customers just want to try new strains. So if you're not adding new strains to your grow, your customers are going to get bored and stop buying your product. And if you don't connect with bud tenders, they're also not going to recommend your product, and you're going to see that hurt your sales. So you want to have staff going out to the dispensary, educating bud tenders. If you can, throw events, have them come out to your farm, try to explain what makes you different, what makes you high quality, and then stay connected. There's a lot of industry events. There's like bud tender specific parties. There's consumption style events that you could be present at. So it's really important to connect with the bud tender, as they really are the gatekeeper, and they could help or hurt your brand pretty significantly.
Brett?
We just try to really simplify things because we are in many, many states. So we focus on quality and consistency. So wherever you are, whatever product, whatever customer we're targeting, if it's a value customer, we want the best value pre-roll available. And then when a customer tries it at that price point and enjoys it, we want them to come back and have a consistent experience every time thereafter. So when they come in for that, $5, $6 pre-roll at retail, they know exactly what to expect, and they know exactly what they're going to get. And so we feel like if we can focus on our costs and deliver that value proposition to the customer, that we're gonna continue to win at whatever SKU tier we're playing in.
Canna, we have won, I think, 4 cannabis cups in the pre-roll segment department. And for our company, the most important thing is quality. What quality are we selecting to be in that pre-roll? That's number one. Number two is the processes we take to trim that flower, to grind that flower, and the way we sift it. When we do those processes in a certain way, and we put in our flour at a certain humidity into the pre-rolls, we have a great pre-roll machine that allows our products not to canoe with all these processes. We use a machine called Apex. You guys should look into it. Pretty cool machine. It's helped us scale. But with those things that we always focus on is quality. It's always been that. If you just hit the quality right, that consumer will eventually appreciate your product compared to the competitors, because most people don't focus on that. They usually just put their bottoms, their extras. It's why the pre-roll industry is so hard to get a footing in, because it's stigmatized as having the worst of all the products in there. So our focus was always to put the best flour that we could find possible at the best price point, and that has really separated us. We're trusted by the consumer.
Yeah, Jason, you're hitting on something big, right? I mean, there's a reason why all the purists always say, like, I'm always going to roll my own, right? And that's because they haven't met a product that met their needs, right? And that's because for the longest time, pre-rolls are the stuff that you swept up off the ground and you ground it up and you put it into into pre-rolls, right? And so there's a huge opportunity here, and you're seeing it, right, with the growth of this category, where as industries evolve and as new states come in, you're going to get the individuals who are kind of curious, who don't know how to smoke cannabis and who want something ease and convenient. So you're going to see that bottom, and then you're going to see from the top as products become more tailored, as sizing becomes more unique, as the terpene profiles get better, as the quality of the inputs get better. You're going to see those individuals who would have swore they're never going to smoke a pre-roll because they want to roll their own start to enter into this space. And so when Jason says that pre-rolls is going to be the number one consumption category in Michigan, I believe him, right? Because there's so much opportunity. So although it's a saturated market, if people are looking to enter into the space, pre-rolls is absolutely a place where you can find success.
Yeah, when the markets first opened up, farmers really did think pre-rolls was a good place to just put shake and trim, and that hurt the value prop of a pre-roll. Customers, would buy those, have poor experiences. But as the price of flour has dropped dramatically, and as the price of concentrates dropped dramatically, you're able to put higher quality materials into the pre-roll, so that's helped to elevate the quality of the product. And then there's been, advancements in automation, dropping the labor costs. So all of these factors are converging to create higher quality pre-rolls at lower price points. So there are companies shifting to higher quality pre-rolls, and then there's going to be a big shift towards focusing on freshness. There's too much supply in the market, and so as that levels off, you'll be able to stay in stock and keep those products off the shelf for too long. I see a future where pre-rolls are like a produce item, where there's a Best By date and you know that sandwich in the grocery store is not sitting there for 15 weeks. It's in there for about 7 to 10 days, and after that point, they throw it away, or if it's like produce, they might sell it to get processed into like applesauce or fruit leather. So I think pre-rolls will be that way as well, where the customer's gonna have confidence that pre-roll's only been there for a few days, and therefore it's fresh, and that's gonna change the stigma around pre-rolls and really help propel pre-rolls to the #1 category.
Brett, earlier you mentioned glass tips, and that you're selling a product that has glass tips, and then I've seen wooden tips as well. Do those sell really well? Are you seeing a big increase from buyers wanting that experience?
Once you try a glass tip, you will never use a paper tip again,
Yeah.
in my estimation. It's that big of a game changer. I've had people say they save them from our prepackaged pre-rolls to use for when they roll their own pre-rolls after that, right? So it's an absolute game changer. To the flower freshness that Harrison mentioned, though, that's going to be a big thing. That's actually an awareness that we're trying to push at our stores, and it's more than just pre-rolls. It applies to flour as well, right? So we have a campaign where we guarantee a minimum amount of days on shelf, and if the flour you buy from us is over that date, you get a significant discount, like 30% off your flour. So I think that the freshness, that born-on-date concept with all flour is going to be a huge thing in our industry, because flour that was harvested and packaged 4 months ago is a lot different than flour that was harvested and packaged 30 days ago. And then especially in markets with varying degrees of, like in Colorado, it's so dry. It's so dry that if you are not moving that product within like 30 days of it getting packaged, literally an eighth can lose 10%, 15% of its weight, just sitting in a shelf in a vault in Colorado. So that's going to be a big part of pre-rolls and flour just in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah, once you smoke out of a glass or ceramic tip, you really never go back. I keep them in my backpack and only roll with those when I'm traveling. At first, you had to hand roll those products, so pre-roll manufacturers literally had teams of people using little plastic rollers, and we're rolling those by hand. At Custom Cones USA, we really innovated that, and we have pre-rolled cones and tubes with both rolling paper and hemp wrap in glass, ceramic, and wood. And then we have tabletop machines as well as automated pre-roll machines that could help pack those at scale. And the paper cone is still going to be the highest selling format, as like the value consumer is driving a lot of the sales. But if you're looking to elevate your brand and help distinguish yourself, having a premium pre-roll product with one of those tips is really going to help that. That gets bud tenders really excited. It's going to help someone try your brand for the first time and really get them hooked and coming back over and over again. Because the glass and ceramic tip doesn't just look cool, it does change the draw. It slows it down a little bit so you get less smoke, so there's less harshness and impact in the back of your throat. And they do cool it down. You'll notice the coolness on your lips from the glass or ceramic tip, and they have like a higher coefficient of heat transfer, so it is cooling down the smoke on a scientific level. I firmly believe a lot of canoeing is user error. If you watch a cigar smoker light a cigar, you could see they're spending like a minute really caring about rotating the cigar and lighting it evenly, and then you look at a cannabis consumer, they just hop outside and light the joint only from one side. And then if the pre-roll's twisted, that could cause a different amount of paper on different sides, and if you're just lighting it from the bottom, it's gonna run. It definitely does have to do with the grinding. The entire pre-roll manufacturing process starts with the grind, and if you have uneven particle distribution, that could help cause it to burn unevenly, as well if it's not packed with a consistent uniformity throughout the entire pre-roll. But I would blame the consumer on a lot of canoeing.
I would really like to thank our panelists for joining in on this discussion. Please give them a round of applause.